Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the price of fuel, food, flights, and even electricity across the world suddenly changed. Not because of war between superpowers like United States, China, or Russia, but because of a decision made in one desert kingdom, a country with a population far smaller than global giants, yet capable of shaking financial markets from New York to Tokyo in a single announcement. That country is Saudi Arabia. Most people think global economic power belongs only to the biggest economies, the US, China, or Europe. But behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia holds a kind of influence that many people underestimate. Through oil investments, strategic alliances, and its leadership role inside OPEC, Saudi Arabia has the ability to quietly affect inflation, trade, energy supply, and even political decisions around the world. In today's video, we're going to uncover how Saudi Arabia became one of the most powerful economic forces on Earth, why global markets pay attention to every move it makes, and how decisions made in Riyadh can impact the lives of billions of people. And by the end of this video, you might start seeing the global economy in a completely different way. But to understand this hidden power, we need to go back to where it all started. Long before skyscrapers filled Riyadh and before Saudi Arabia became a major player in global politics, the country was mostly known for its deserts, trade routes, and religious importance. But everything changed in the 20th century when massive oil reserves were discovered beneath its land. This discovery transformed Saudi Arabia from a relatively quiet kingdom into the center of the global energy system. Oil quickly became the most important resource in the modern world, powering factories, transportation, military operations, and economic growth. And Saudi Arabia happened to be sitting on one of the largest supplies on the planet. As demand for energy exploded after World War II, industrial nations like the United States and countries across Europe began relying heavily on Middle Eastern oil. Among all oil-producing nations, Saudi Arabia stood out because of one key advantage. It could produce huge amounts of oil at relatively low cost. This meant Saudi Arabia didn't just sell oil, it could influence how much oil entered the global market. And when supply changes, prices change. When prices change, entire economies react. Soon, Saudi Arabia became the most influential member of OPEC, a group of oil-producing nations that coordinate production to manage global supply. In many situations, the world has watched closely as Saudi leaders decided whether to increase oil production to stabilize markets or reduce supply, causing prices to surge. And this is where the hidden power begins. Because when oil prices rise, transportation becomes expensive, food prices increase, businesses face higher costs, and inflation spreads across the world. A single decision in Riyadh can quietly ripple through the global economy, affecting millions of households who may never even realize where the change started. Over time, world leaders, economists, and investors began understanding something important. Saudi Arabia wasn't just another country exporting oil. It had become one of the key stabilizers and sometimes disruptors of the global economy. And this influence would only grow stronger in the decades that followed, because oil was just the beginning of Saudi Arabia's power. While oil gave Saudi Arabia its initial leverage, its influence expanded through the petrodollar system, a term that sounds complicated but is surprisingly simple in impact. After the 1970s oil shocks, Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exclusively in US dollars, in exchange for military protection and economic support from United States. This decision created a massive continuous flow of dollars from all over the world back into the US economy. Every time a country bought oil from Saudi Arabia, it had to hold dollars, invest in US assets, or trade in dollars. This system didn't just support the US financially, it also gave Saudi Arabia an unprecedented level of influence over global finance. Imagine billions of dollars circulating around the globe every day, tied to one small country's oil decisions. By managing production levels and pricing, Saudi Arabia could indirectly influence currency strength, global inflation rates, and even the financial health of entire nations. Moreover, the kingdom's vast wealth, accumulated from decades of oil profits, wasn't sitting idle. Saudi Arabia invested heavily through its sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund, PIF, in technology, infrastructure, and foreign markets. From stakes in major corporations to mega real estate projects, the kingdom became a silent but formidable player in global capital markets. Through this combination of oil control and strategic investments, Saudi Arabia created a situation where its decisions affect not just energy prices, but economic stability worldwide. Economists, traders, and world leaders watch Riyadh as closely as they do Washington, Beijing, or Moscow, because even small policy shifts can trigger reactions across global markets. In essence, what started as an oil-exporting country became a cornerstone of modern global finance, holding power that few nations outside the top economies could claim. Saudi Arabia's influence isn't always visible. It's subtle, strategic, and often behind the scenes. This sets the stage for another dimension of power: how Riyadh uses diplomacy, alliances, and regional strategy to protect and amplify its economic clout. Saudi Arabia's economic power is inseparable from its geopolitical strategy. While oil and investments give it leverage over markets, the kingdom has also carefully cultivated alliances with powerful nations, particularly the United States. These alliances provide both security and the ability to amplify its influence beyond its borders. The relationship with the US is the most obvious example. For decades, Washington has relied on Saudi Arabia not only for oil but also for stability in the Middle East. In return, the kingdom received military support, advanced technology, and a seat at key international negotiations. This mutually beneficial relationship allows Saudi Arabia to act as a gatekeeper in regional conflicts, giving it political clout that extends far beyond its borders. But alliances aren't limited to the West. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has diversified its partnerships, engaging economically and politically with powers like China and Russia. While alliances provide Saudi Arabia with strategic influence, its most powerful tool remains energy itself. Oil isn't just a commodity, it's the lifeblood of the modern economy. Planes, ships, factories, electricity grids, almost everything depends on oil. And because Saudi Arabia sits on roughly 16% of the world's proven oil reserves, it holds an almost unmatched ability to influence global supply and pricing. The kingdom's role in OPEC amplifies this power. Through OPEC, Saudi Arabia can coordinate production with other oil-exporting countries, increasing or decreasing supply to influence prices. A small reduction in output can cause oil prices to surge, triggering inflation, increased transportation costs, and higher energy bills worldwide. Conversely, a production increase can stabilize or even lower prices, affecting everything from food costs to the stock markets. This power becomes even more pronounced during global crises. For example, when conflicts arise in oil-rich regions, or when sanctions target major producers while oil gives Saudi Arabia immediate leverage over markets, its long-term global influence comes from wealth management and strategic investments. At the heart of this financial power is the Public Investment Fund, PIF, the kingdom's sovereign wealth fund, which manages hundreds of billions of dollars and continues to grow rapidly. This isn't just a savings account, it's a strategic weapon that allows Saudi Arabia to shape industries, technologies, and markets worldwide. Through the PIF, Saudi Arabia has invested in some of the largest and most influential companies on the planet, from tech giants in Silicon Valley to renewable energy projects in Europe. The kingdom's capital reaches nearly every corner of the global economy. Each investment isn't just about earning profits, it's about gaining strategic stakes in sectors that drive innovation, control supply chains, and influence consumer behavior. For example, the PIF has poured billions into companies like Uber, Tesla, and major entertainment ventures, giving Saudi Arabia a seat at the table in industries that touch billions of lives. When the kingdom invests in a company or sector, it often signals confidence, encouraging other investors to follow suit. Conversely, pulling back or delaying investment can cause market uncertainty, demonstrating another layer of subtle power. This financial reach also extends into infrastructure, real estate, and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, robotics, and renewable energy. By positioning itself in these high-growth sectors, Saudi Arabia ensures that its influence will persist long after the era of fossil fuels begins to wane. In effect, the PF allows Saudi Arabia to convert oil wealth into lasting global power. Unlike the temporary spikes caused by oil price changes, these investments are long-term levers that can reshape industries, shift economic trends, and even influence geopolitical alignments. Through a combination of energy control and smart global investments, Saudi Arabia has transformed itself from a resource-dependent kingdom into a financial powerhouse capable of influencing economies, politics, and industries worldwide, all without firing a shot. This financial influence naturally leads to the next layer of power. Saudi Arabia's ability to shape global energy markets and alliances simultaneously, which gives it a rare dual advantage in economic and political arenas. Saudi Arabia's power isn't limited to just oil or investments alone. It comes from the strategic combination of both. The kingdom can use its energy resources to influence markets while simultaneously deploying financial tools to support political or economic objectives. This dual approach gives Riyadh a level of global influence that few nations, even superpowers, can match. For instance, during periods of global energy uncertainty, Saudi Arabia can adjust oil production to stabilize or disrupt markets. When oil prices rise sharply, inflation spreads, affecting economies worldwide. By coordinating production cuts or increases, the kingdom doesn't just impact economics, it can also apply political pressure. Countries dependent on oil imports may have to rethink alliances, adjust policies, or seek Saudi approval for cooperation in energy projects. At the same time, through the Public Investment Fund, PIF, and other financial instruments, Saudi Arabia can strategically place capital in sectors or regions that align with its economic and political goals. For example, by investing heavily in renewable energy, technology, or infrastructure abroad, the kingdom can gain influence over emerging markets, strengthen bilateral ties, and secure long-term returns that reinforce its strategic leverage. This combination creates a subtle but powerful dynamic. Saudi Arabia can encourage or discourage certain economic behaviors without direct confrontation. A rise in oil prices might slow a competitor's growth, while an investment in a key industry signals confidence or partnership. This is why financial analysts and world leaders closely monitor Riyadh's decisions. Every move can have a ripple effect across economies, stock markets, and international relations. Moreover, the kingdom's leadership role in OPEC allows it to coordinate not just with allies, but with competitors. This coordination ensures that the kingdom maintains a dominant voice in shaping global energy policies, while also preserving flexibility to act independently when necessary. In short, Saudi Arabia has mastered the art of economic diplomacy, using oil and capital not just for profit, but as instruments of influence, shaping both markets and political outcomes across the globe. Saudi Arabia's influence might seem distant, but its decisions affect the lives of billions of people worldwide. When Riyadh adjusts oil production or prices, the effects ripple across the global economy, touching everything from the cost of commuting to the price of groceries. Higher oil prices increase transportation and shipping costs, which in turn drive up the price of goods and services everywhere. Even central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the United States or the European Central Bank, must consider oil price fluctuations when setting interest rates, because energy costs directly influence inflation. Consider this: a decision by Saudi Arabia to reduce oil production by just a few million barrels per day can cause a global price spike, sending shockwaves through stock markets, consumer prices, and corporate profits. Countries heavily reliant on oil imports suddenly face economic strain, while industries like airlines, shipping, and manufacturing must adjust to rising operational costs. For ordinary citizens, this often shows up as higher gas prices, more expensive air travel, and rising costs for everyday goods. Beyond energy prices, Saudi Arabia's investments in major global companies also affect the financial markets that individuals depend on, including pensions, retirement funds, and investment portfolios. When the kingdom invests billions into a tech company, it can drive stock prices up, attracting global investors. Conversely, pulling back or slowing investments can create uncertainty and even market dips, demonstrating how a single nation can quietly influence wealth and investment trends worldwide. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia's strategic geopolitical positioning in the Middle East ensures that its energy and financial power intersects with global security. For instance, conflicts in the region or threats to energy infrastructure often cause market panic, highlighting how intertwined the kingdom's decisions are with global stability. In essence, the power of Saudi Arabia is both economic and systemic. It shapes not just trade and investment, but also the daily financial reality of people across continents. From grocery prices to stock markets, its reach is profound and often invisible. By this point, it becomes clear that Saudi Arabia's influence isn't just economic. It is deeply tied to global diplomacy. Energy has become one of the most powerful tools in international relations, and few countries understand this better than Saudi Arabia. Instead of relying only on military strength or political pressure, the kingdom often uses energy partnerships to build alliances and maintain influence across multiple regions of the world. One of the most important aspects of this strategy is Saudi Arabia's leadership inside OPEC and its cooperation with non-OPEC producers, especially Russia. This collaboration, often called OPEC Plus, allows major oil producers to coordinate production decisions that influence the entire global market. When these countries agree to reduce or increase output together, the impact on oil prices can be immediate and massive, forcing governments and industries worldwide to adjust their economic strategies. But Saudi Arabia's diplomacy goes beyond oil agreements. In recent years, the kingdom has expanded its relationships with major global powers such as China and the United States at the same time. This balancing act is extremely strategic. By maintaining strong ties with multiple global powers, Saudi Arabia ensures that no single country dominates its economic future. Instead, it positions itself as a crucial partner that everyone wants to stay connected with. This approach has made Riyadh one of the most important negotiation hubs in global politics. When energy crises emerge, or when markets face uncertainty, many countries quietly turn to Saudi Arabia for cooperation. Whether it's stabilizing oil prices, increasing supply during shortages, or coordinating long-term energy strategies, the kingdom often plays a mediating role that helps prevent global economic disruptions. Energy diplomacy also strengthens Saudi Arabia's influence in developing nations. Many emerging economies depend heavily on stable energy supplies to support industrial growth and infrastructure development. By forming energy partnerships, financing projects, and offering long-term supply agreements, Saudi Arabia builds relationships that can last for decades, effectively expanding its influence far beyond the Middle East. Over time, this network of alliances has created a situation where Saudi Arabia is not just an oil producer, but a central node in the global energy system. Countries might compete politically or economically, but when it comes to energy stability, many of them still rely on cooperation with Riyadh. And this growing diplomatic influence connects directly to to the next major shift happening inside the kingdom itself, a transformation that could reshape not only Saudi Arabia's future, but also the global economy. Because Saudi Arabia is preparing for a world after oil. For decades, Saudi Arabia's power was built mainly on oil. But the leadership of Saudi Arabia understands something many people around the world are just beginning to realize. The global economy is slowly changing. Renewable energy, new technologies, and shifting markets mean that oil alone may not dominate forever. That's why the kingdom launched one of the most ambitious transformation plans in modern history. Vision 2030, led by Mohammed bin Salman. Vision 2030 is not just a national development plan, it is a strategy to reshape Saudi Arabia's role in the global economy. The goal is to diversify the country's income sources so that even when oil demand eventually declines, Saudi Arabia will remain a powerful economic center. This includes massive investments in tourism, technology, renewable energy, entertainment, logistics, and global finance. One of the most ambitious projects within this transformation is NEOM, a futuristic city planned to be powered largely by renewable energy and advanced technology. The project aims to attract international businesses, investors, and innovators from around the world. If successful, it could turn Saudi Arabia into a global hub for technology and trade, similar to how cities like Dubai or Singapore became economic gateways in their regions. At the same time, Saudi Arabia is investing heavily in sectors that will dominate the future economy: artificial intelligence, green hydrogen energy, advanced manufacturing, and digital infrastructure. By doing this, the kingdom is trying to secure influence in the next generation of global industries, not just traditional energy markets. Another major shift is the opening of Saudi Arabia to international tourism and business partnerships. For decades, the country remained relatively closed compared to other global economies. Now new policies, mega projects, and international events are being used to attract investors and companies that want to be part of the kingdom's economic transformation. What makes this transition so important is that it doesn't reduce Saudi Arabia's power, it expands it. Instead of being influential only because of oil, the kingdom aims to become influential in multiple sectors at once: energy, finance, technology, and global investment. If Vision 2030 succeeds, Saudi Arabia could move from being known primarily as an oil giant to becoming one of the most diversified economic powers in the world. And this transformation is already changing how global powers interact with the kingdom. Because now, countries are not only interested in Saudi oil, they want access to its future economy. As Saudi Arabia transforms its economy and expands its influence, something interesting is happening on the global stage. Major world powers are competing to strengthen their relationship with the kingdom. This competition is not always obvious to the public, but behind the scenes, it plays a major role in shaping global politics and economic decisions. For decades, the closest partnership existed between Saudi Arabia and the United States. The relationship was built on a simple exchange: energy stability in return for security cooperation. The United States relied on Saudi Arabia as one of the most reliable oil producers capable of stabilizing global markets during crises, while Saudi Arabia benefited from military technology, defense agreements, and political support. However, the global balance of power has been shifting. Today, countries like China have become major buyers of Middle Eastern energy and key economic partners. China's rapid industrial growth requires enormous energy supplies, and Saudi Arabia plays a crucial role in meeting that demand. At the same time, China is investing in infrastructure, trade routes, and technology partnerships that align with Saudi Arabia's long-term economic transformation. Meanwhile, Russia has developed a different type of relationship with Saudi Arabia, one centered on energy cooperation and market coordination. Despite geopolitical differences, both countries understand that working together on oil production policies can influence global prices and strengthen their positions in international energy markets. What makes Saudi Arabia unique is that it has managed to maintain relationships with all these powers without fully aligning with just one side. This balanced diplomacy gives Riyadh significant leverage. When multiple global powers want cooperation with the same country, that country gains negotiating power in trade, technology partnerships, and geopolitical agreements. Another reason superpowers value Saudi Arabia is its geographic and strategic importance. Located at the crossroads of Asia, Europe, and Africa, the kingdom sits near some of the most critical global shipping routes and energy corridors. This location makes it a key player in global trade and supply chains. In simple terms, Saudi Arabia has reached a position where major global powers cannot ignore it. Whether it's energy stability, economic investment, or geopolitical influence, maintaining a strong relationship with Riyadh has become a priority for some of the most powerful countries in the world. And as Saudi Arabia continues expanding its global reach, the next big question emerges. What would happen if the kingdom used its power more aggressively or changed alliances in the future? Because that possibility alone is enough to make global markets nervous. By now, it's clear that Saudi Arabia holds enormous influence over energy, investments, and international diplomacy. But the real reason the world pays such close attention to Riyadh is not just the power it currently uses, it's the power it could use if it decided to change direction. Imagine a scenario where Saudi Arabia suddenly shifts its strategy in global markets. For example, if the kingdom decided to significantly reduce oil production for an extended period, global oil prices could surge dramatically. This would immediately affect major economies like the United States, Europe, and many developing nations that rely heavily on imported energy. Inflation would rise, transportation costs would increase, and economic growth in several regions could slow down. Another scenario that analysts often discuss is what might happen if Saudi Arabia strengthened its economic partnerships even further with countries like China or expanded energy coordination with Russia. This could shift global trade dynamics and potentially alter how energy markets operate. Even small adjustments in long-term energy agreements could reshape international supply chains and change which countries hold the most influence in global markets. Financial markets are also sensitive to Saudi Arabia's strategic decisions. Because the kingdom controls massive investment funds and participates in global financial systems, a shift in investment priorities could influence stock markets, infrastructure projects, and technological development worldwide. Investors often monitor Saudi policy changes closely because they can signal broader shifts in global economic trends. But perhaps the most important factor is stability. Saudi Arabia has often acted as a balancing force in the global energy system. Many countries depend on the kingdom to prevent extreme supply shortages during crises. If that stabilizing role were reduced or altered, markets could become more volatile, making the global economy more unpredictable. This is why economists, policymakers, and world leaders consistently study Saudi Arabia's decisions, not only to understand what is happening today, but also to anticipate what might happen tomorrow. The kingdom's choices have the potential to influence global markets in ways that extend far beyond its borders. In reality, Saudi Arabia tends to move carefully and strategically. Its leadership understands that stability benefits both the kingdom and the global economy. But the possibility of change alone is enough to remind the world how important Saudi Arabia's role truly is. And this leads us to another critical dimension of Saudi Arabia's power, something that goes beyond economics and politics. Because Saudi Arabia also holds religious and cultural influence that affects billions of people worldwide. Beyond economics, energy, and politics, Saudi Arabia holds another form of influence that is rarely discussed in global economic conversations, but is incredibly important: religious significance. The kingdom is home to two of the holiest cities in Islam, Mecca and Medina. Every year, millions of Muslims from around the world travel to these cities for pilgrimage, including the annual Hajj. This religious connection gives Saudi Arabia a unique position in the world. Unlike economic power, which can rise and fall over time, religious significance creates long-term influence across cultures, societies, and nations. Many countries with large Muslim populations maintain strong relationships with Saudi Arabia, not just because of oil or trade, but also because of these deep spiritual connections. The impact of this influence extends into diplomacy and global relations. Leaders from various parts of the Muslim world often engage with Saudi Arabia on issues that go beyond economics, including education, humanitarian aid, religious cooperation, and cultural exchange. This allows the kingdom to build soft power, a form of influence that works through respect, shared identity, and global community ties. Economically, religious tourism also plays a major role. Millions of visitors traveling to Mecca and Medina contribute significantly to Saudi Arabia's economy through hotels, transportation, infrastructure, and services. Over time, the kingdom has invested heavily in expanding these cities, modernizing airports, building high-speed rail networks, and improving facilities to accommodate growing numbers of pilgrims. This combination of spiritual importance and economic activity strengthens Saudi Arabia's global position in a unique way. While other countries may dominate in technology or military strength, Saudi Arabia holds a central role in the lives of Muslims worldwide, creating connections that extend across continents. But perhaps the most interesting part is how Saudi Arabia is integrating this religious and cultural importance into its broader economic transformation. Under major development plans, the kingdom is expanding religious tourism while simultaneously growing sectors like entertainment, technology, and international business. In doing so, Saudi Arabia is building a new kind of global identity, one that blends tradition, economic power, and modernization. And as the kingdom continues evolving, the world is starting to recognize that its influence goes far beyond oil or investments. The real question now is, how strong will Saudi Arabia become in the coming decades? Over the past few decades, the global balance of power has been slowly shifting. Regions that were once considered dependent on larger economies are now becoming centers of influence themselves. Among these emerging power centers, Saudi Arabia is rapidly positioning itself as one of the most important in the Middle East and possibly the world. Historically, global economic power was concentrated in places like North America, Europe, and parts of East Asia. But today, the Middle East is gaining strategic importance due to energy resources, trade routes, investment flows, and technological development. Saudi Arabia sits right at the center of this transformation. One major factor behind this shift is geography. Saudi Arabia is located between three major continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa, making it a natural hub for trade, transportation, and logistics. As global supply chains evolve, countries are looking for new economic corridors, and Saudi Arabia is investing heavily in ports, shipping infrastructure, and international business zones to take advantage of this opportunity. At the same time, the kingdom is working to become a regional leader in new industries. Large-scale investments in renewable energy, technology hubs, and smart cities are designed to attract global companies that want to expand into the Middle East. This means that in the future, multinational corporations might not only open offices in traditional financial centers, but also in rapidly growing economic hubs inside Saudi Arabia. Another key factor is regional leadership. Many countries in the Middle East look to Saudi Arabia for economic direction and stability. When Riyadh launches major initiatives or investment programs, neighboring economies often benefit through partnerships, trade agreements, and development projects. This strengthens Saudi Arabia's role as a central driver of regional economic growth. In addition, global events, conferences, and investment summits hosted in Saudi Arabia are bringing world leaders, CEOs, and innovators together in one place. These gatherings are gradually reshaping the perception of the kingdom, from being seen primarily as an oil exporter to being recognized as a major global economic platform. What we are witnessing is the rise of a country that is not just reacting to global changes, but actively shaping them. Saudi Arabia is building influence across multiple layers: energy, finance, technology, diplomacy, and regional development. And as these layers continue to expand, the kingdom's role in the global system becomes harder to ignore. This leads us toward one of the most important questions of all. Is Saudi Arabia becoming one of the most strategically important countries of the 21st century? As the world moves deeper into the 21st century, many experts believe that global power is no longer controlled by a single country or region. Instead, influence is becoming distributed across strategic nations, and one of the most important among them is clearly Saudi Arabia. The reason is simple. Very few countries today control so many critical pillars of global influence at the same time. Saudi Arabia has energy dominance, massive financial reserves, strategic geography, and growing technological ambitions. When you combine all these factors, you get a country capable of shaping not just markets, but the future direction of global development. Consider the transition happening right now in the global energy system. The world is gradually shifting toward renewable energy, electric vehicles, and new technologies. Many people assume this change will reduce Saudi Arabia's importance, but the reality might be the opposite. Saudi Arabia is investing heavily in renewable projects, hydrogen energy, and next-generation infrastructure, positioning itself to remain a major energy leader even in a post-oil world. At the same time, global powers like the United States, China, and Russia continue to strengthen their relationships with the kingdom, not because they are forced to, but because cooperation with Saudi Arabia often provides stability in markets that are otherwise unpredictable. Another important factor is global investment. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth and mega projects are attracting companies, entrepreneurs, and innovators from around the world. In many ways, the kingdom is trying to become a new center of global economic gravity, where business, technology, and international partnerships meet. This means the next decade could be extremely important. If Saudi Arabia successfully completes its transformation and continues expanding its global influence, it could become one of the most strategically important countries shaping the global economy. And this possibility is exactly why governments, investors, and analysts around the world are watching every move the kingdom makes. Because what happens in Riyadh today might shape the global economy tomorrow. When people think about global power, they usually imagine military strength, superpower rivalries, or economic giants battling for dominance. But sometimes the real influence comes from countries that operate quietly, strategically, and patiently over time. That is exactly what makes Saudi Arabia so fascinating. It doesn't always dominate headlines the way other global powers do, yet its decisions can influence oil prices, global markets, investment trends, and even political alliances across continents. A production decision, a major investment, or a diplomatic agreement can send signals across the entire world economy. What makes this even more interesting is that Saudi Arabia's power is evolving. It is no longer just about oil wells and energy exports. Today, it is about technology, finance, global partnerships, megacities, and economic transformation on a scale rarely seen in modern history. In many ways, the kingdom is rewriting its own story, shifting from a traditional energy giant into a multi-dimensional global power. And if the current trajectory continues, the world might soon realize that one of the most influential countries shaping the global economy was never the loudest one, but the one working strategically behind the scenes. Which brings us to an important thought. Sometimes the countries that truly shape the future are not the ones everyone talks about, but the ones the world depends on without even realizing it. If you found this story interesting, then you're going to love what we explore on Cashlorex, where we break down hidden global powers, economic secrets, and the real forces shaping the world's future. Because the truth is, there are many stories like this happening right now behind the scenes of the global economy. And in the next video on Cashlorex, we might uncover something even more surprising. So make sure you're ready for what comes next.